Welcome to the Beau Show. We all know Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, right? A dorky dude with the glasses and a fuzzy sweater that has thrown himself into the spotlight during the pandemic, transitioning from computers to vaccine technology. There's quite a bit of mystery surrounding Bill Gates, dating all the way back to his association with Microsoft, and more recently, his high-profile divorce with his wife Melinda, with whom he shares his foundation, another shroud of controversy. I thought I would devote this particular show to dive deep into Bill Gates and what we know about him and what we don't know about him, because frankly, we need to know more. Gates has used his fortune to carefully craft his image, so sometimes it's hard to get a read on him. Let's go back to the beginning. When Gates founded Microsoft, he had to testify in Congress as part of a case, the United States versus Microsoft, an antitrust case in 1998. Microsoft was accused of monopolizing competition with the integration of its operating system and Internet Explorer browser, thus illegally thwarting competition under the Sherman Antitrust Act. Listen to Gates dance around with words in this deposition.
Well, supporting can mean a lot of different things.
I
never expected at any time that they would not support the Netscape browser in terms of running with it, working with it, supporting it, and all those things. In terms of did I use that specific word, no, I don't have a recollection. But support can mean quite a few things.
What I'm not doing right now is asking what you meant by support. What I'm asking you is whether you told Mr. Poole that. Do you understand the distinction?
Did I use those words?
That you told Mr. Poole.
See, if you're going to ask me, did I use the exact words, you can ask me that question. Or if you're going to ask me if I said something like that, that's okay. But then I have to actually understand what you mean by the words.
Okay, let's take it one step at a time. Did you tell Mr. Poole that if Intuit was to have access to a position on the active desktop, Intuit would have to stop, quote, supporting, close quote, or could no longer, quote, support, close quote, the Netscape browser?
What does it mean when you keep going in and out of quotes like that?
It means you use the word supporting or you use the word support.
This reminded me of the testimony of Bill Clinton, who couldn't seem to agree on what the word is meant. As far as I'm concerned, is was a pet name I had for Isabella, who I met a few times in Little Rock. So you can see that Gates, even in the 90s, was a master of deception and obfuscation. Ultimately, the court found that Microsoft had violated antitrust laws in thwarting its competition. Gates took painfully awkward amounts of time to answer questions and said, "I don't recall," so many times that the judge laughed. He obfuscated, he stalled, and he lied. Microsoft submitted video evidence that was determined to be falsified. But remember this incident, because when it comes to monopolization, Gates has a thirst for it. When you have a bad public image, like Gates had from these monopoly tactics, what do? Well, you get philanthropic. Gates and his wife started the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in 2000. As of today, Gates is the fourth richest person in the world. So what do you do with all that money? Well, the humble thing to do would be to give it away. Fund some research, give to the poor, right? That's why you create a foundation. Think of what Bill and Hillary Clinton did. They created the Clinton Foundation. Gates claims that he modeled his foundation after the philanthropic philosophy of David Rockefeller, with a focus on tackling global problems that are ignored by governments and other organizations. The Gates Foundation is divided into 5 areas, including a global health division, which Gates really seems to take an interest in. Here he is talking to a journalist about the COVID-19 pandemic in December of 2020.
There to think ahead to bad things that might happen. In the case of pandemic, not enough was done. So, we can't forget that another pandemic will come and we'll need to invest in being ready in that. I think that's very important. digital things overall, whether it's remote learning or telemedicine or digital finance, were greatly advanced. So even though, the pandemic's been terrible, it has pushed for some of these innovations, including in, how quickly we make vaccines. So there is a bright side, and we'll just have to take full advantage of that while not forgetting that we were not prepared, and we're going to have to invest, just like having a fire department, invest some money in an intelligent way and actually simulate, what might happen and make sure that we're ready for it.
Okay, first of all, I got to know who his hairstylist is. But it's interesting that Gates talks about a simulation because his foundation funded just such a simulation called Event 201, which was profiled in Mickey Willis's documentary Plandemic, which was removed from all social media. That was extremely peculiar. Event 201 was a pandemic simulation on October 18th, 2019 in cooperation with Johns Hopkins and the World Economic Forum. This event was supposed to explore the private and public partnerships that would be necessary in a global pandemic. Oddly enough, this exercise predicted a fictional coronavirus as the culprit. Could this have been just sheer coincidence? It was an invite-only event. Lots of elites, simulations, war games, experts predicting how the media would react and how people would panic and resist lockdowns. Remember that in a 2015 TED Talk, Bill Gates said this.
These investments offer significant benefits beyond just being ready for the epidemic. The primary health care, the R&D, those things would reduce global health equity and make the world more just as well as more safe. So I think this should absolutely be a priority. There's no need to panic. We don't have to hoard cans of spaghetti or go down into the basement. But we need to get going because time is not on our side. In fact, if there's one positive thing that can come out of the Ebola epidemic, it's that it can serve as an early warning, a wake-up call to get ready. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Thank you.
So if he was saying this in 2015 and they simulated a SARS-style pandemic just before it actually happened, what good was it? What did the Gates Foundation do to help global private-public partnerships? As I recall, we had toilet paper shortages, we had lockdowns, we had resistance, we had media fear-mongering, we had all the very things these simulations predicted. So for a guy as rich and influential as Bill Gates, why didn't he do anything? USA Today sure was quick to come to the aid of Gates by slapping a false ruling on the claim that Event 201 predicted the real pandemic. But they do so using semantics. No one has been questioning why Gates, who has been interested in global health for a long time and raised a lot of awareness, could be so impotent when the real pandemic came along. These exercises were very accurate and realistic. So if that's the case, where was Bill Gates in all of this? He's been talking about this for a while. He predicted supply chain issues, shortage of PPE and hospital beds. So was this just an exercise for elites to figure out what they should do? Was this not a warning to the medical system? There is no doubt that Gates has donated a lot of his wealth to some worthy causes, including the Dementia Discovery Fund for Alzheimer's research. But it's his foundation that I'm concerned about because it comes under the guise of helping us. And for the life of me, I can't comprehend how his team could so accurately simulate our real pandemic with his hypothetical one and yet do so little to help. Isn't that the whole point? To find out how private innovation can help us? His foundation has a problematic relationship with the polio vaccine in India. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation worked on polio eradication programs in India and the research and development of an oral polio vaccine. In the mid-2000s, there was a correlation between the administering of this oral vaccine with a sharp rise in non-polio acute flaccid paralysis. The World Health Organization, whom we know is corrupt, issued a statement saying that while they believe the oral polio vaccine is extremely safe and effective tool for immunizing children against the disease, at the same time it said, quote, on very rare occasions, OPV can lead to vaccine-associated paralytic polio or vaccine-derived poliovirus, unquote. Now, I'm never one to conflate correlation with causation, but there was a sharp rise in this type of paralysis at the same time a ton of kids were getting the vaccine. In 2000, at a time when the WHO declared that wild polio had been totally eradicated in Africa, a number of vaccine-induced polio cases began springing up in Sudan and Chad. That is because the oral polio vaccine uses a weakened form of polio. Bottom line is, while Bill Gates has been using his foundation to boost his image in the name of helping needy countries in health matters, in some cases, there has been substantial damage. Even in January of 2021, Reuters reported that Gates was, quote, surprised by conspiracy theories about him and Anthony Fauci. Well, they're only conspiracy theories until they are proved to be true. And Fauci's chickens have come home to roost, as the NIH is admitting now funding gain-of-function research in the Wuhan lab. During Trump's presidency, Gates said to Reuters that sometimes it felt like Fauci and NIH head Francis Collins were the only sane people in the US government, and was excited that Joe Biden had rejoined the World Health Organization and that Fauci wouldn't be suppressed. So you see now why Gates has very shaky credibility? We also know that the Gates Foundation works with Monsanto, the company that makes genetically modified food. I've yet to see any major media outlet attempt to press Gates about his involvement with vaccine and pandemic-related simulations and why his group has been entirely impotent at helping the world if his simulations are strikingly similar to the actual pandemic. For instance, in my research, I found a copious amount of journalism merely deflecting criticism of Gates rather than asking the right questions. Reuters, PolitiFact, the AP, it's like they were more concerned with protecting his image and his reputation than they were finding out why he has funded billions to things that haven't really been effective. This is a guy who still believes in Anthony Fauci. In fact, what I find is more vitriol and negativity towards those individuals and groups who question Gates, such as Robert F. Kennedy. If you'll notice, anyone that touts a treatment for COVID that might be effective is considered a lunatic or a conspiracy theorist, like Joe Rogan, for instance. But if it's about a vaccine, the press is always positive. Why can't we be inquisitive about both? Remember that the lab leak theory was just some nutty theory until we found out more about what the NIH and Wuhan Institute of Virology were actually doing. Melinda Gates, Bill's wife, wasn't satisfied with Bill's handling of a previously undisclosed sexual harassment claim against his longtime money manager, according to some people that are familiar with the matter. Others have claimed that Gates pursued women who either worked for him at Microsoft or the Gates Foundation. In 2019, Microsoft's board of directors opened an investigation into one of those cases from the year 2000. The following year, Gates stepped down from the board. Gates admitted the affair. Gates had a penchant for hitting on women at Microsoft and the Gates Foundation and asking them out, much to their discomfort. And then this is the big bombshell, and much of the reason that I've devoted a show to Gates is his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, which began in 2011, 3 years after Epstein pled guilty to soliciting prostitution from a minor. Apparently, Melinda felt uncomfortable with the time her husband was spending with a sex offender. Only in 2019, when this cozy relationship between Gates and Epstein was revealed, did Melinda begin hiring divorce lawyers. Gates spent time on Epstein's jet and at his Manhattan townhouse. He's reported to have said that Epstein's lifestyle is intriguing. Gates spokespeople are huge spin machines. They claim that he and Epstein only met to talk philanthropy. Do they really expect us to believe that? Epstein was trafficking women left and right, but his PR team is saying that it was 100% philanthropy. Like many wealthy elites, they hide their deviance under the guise of philanthropy for positive self-image. Think about it. The Clintons, Epstein, Gates, they all throw money around to give the impression they're doing the world this big favor, when corruption is rampant internally. It's like, how can Epstein do it for the kids when he's literally doing kids and trafficking them? Then, in an almost diabolical way, Gates said this recently to PBS.
It was reported at that time that you had a number of meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, who, when you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors. What did you know about him when you were meeting with him, as you've said yourself, in the hopes of raising money?
I had dinners with him. I regret doing that. He had relationships with people he said, would give to global health, which is a interest I have. Not nearly enough philanthropy goes in that direction. Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in what he purported, and I cut them off. That goes back a long time ago now. So there's nothing new on that.
It was reported that you continued to meet with him over several years, and that, in other words, a number of meetings. What did you do when you found out about his background?
Well, I've said I regretted having those dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful. I'm very proud of what we've done in philanthropy. Very proud of the work of the foundation. That's what I get up every day and focus on.
Well, he's dead? Are you kidding me? That's all Gates has got? To her credit, Judy Woodruff is trying to get a proper answer from Gates about his relationship with Epstein. And all Gates can say is that he's dead? Move along. Nothing to see here. And then he spins back to his foundation being proud of the work he's doing. Mind you, this type of work that simulates pandemics but does nothing to minimize their impact or supply chain woes or increasing hospital efficiency. You can tell that Gates was wringing his hands in this interview and squirming during these persistent questions. He knows it's a stain on his image. He knows he can't back out of it. Any person that spent 10 years with Epstein would know what he was about. It was not a mystery. He's saying that he was just a business associate, just a guy he talked philanthropy with. And he did this for 10 years, but yet they didn't really do anything together philanthropically. Then what on earth were they talking about for 10 years? This guy and his whole team are spin machines. And I think he bought this positive PR. High-profile divorces are usually pretty messy, and they make private lives public. But we know that Gates had a penchant for hitting on women that worked for him. We know that he had at least one affair. We know that he made his wife very uncomfortable, and the Epstein relationship strained that. Having this foundation together was maybe the glue that kept them together. But we have to realize that not every foundation is great. It's just the appearance of great. And who does it benefit the most? The rich people who started it. Sometimes philanthropic organizations are merely shells for people to move around money. At one point, the FBI and Department of Justice wanted to open an investigation into the corruption in the Clinton Foundation, for instance. But Obama officials settled it. University of Essex sociologist Lindsay McGoey, who has studied the Gates Foundation, was asked about all the good work Gates has done. And here's what she said, quote, "I honestly don't know." And that's the scary thing. Fundamentally, it's very difficult to measure a private foundation's efficacy, unquote. A 2008 article by 2 Oxford researchers published in The Lancet argued that the Gates Foundation was, quote, misfinancing global health, unquote, paying most of its grants out to rich countries and prioritizing infectious diseases such as HIV/AIDS and malaria over major chronic killers such as obesity, cancer, and diabetes. Gates Foundation's work on malaria drew criticism as well. A 2013 article in Global Society pointed out that the head of the WHO's malaria research complained that the foundation was stifling debate on the best ways to treat and combat malaria, prioritizing only those methods that relied on new technology or developing new drugs. And Lindsay McGoey said, quote, "There's immense concern surrounding the Gates Foundation's position on intellectual property rights and whether this major global health player is cognizant enough to ensure property rights are fair for citizens in wealthy and poor nations, unquote. So this means that Gates is trying to protect patents and not create competition and lower prices for drugs, especially generics. While studying the Gates Foundation, Sophie Harmon, an academic at Queen Mary University of London, noticed that even though the foundation is one of the single most powerful players in global health, remarkably few people ever had anything negative to say about it, outside of just some skeptical academics. A lot of this has to do with the fact that no one wants to lose their funding, and they know how many billions Gates puts into funding. So no one really criticizes the Gates Foundation. And therein lies a big problem. Sometimes when you fund a project, you are bound by that person or entity funding you. If they want you to find a particular end result, you feel pressured to do so, which is not scientific at all. Plus, we know that many of the foundation's experiments in R&D have not been successful. You'll never be 100% successful. You see a ton of scrutiny on big players like the Koch brothers, but you don't see that same level of scrutiny with Gates. That's a major issue we are dealing with right now in terms of right versus left and who gets the lion's share of criticism. Right is looked at critically, the left is not. There's a term for big spending like the Gates Foundation does, and it's called philanthrocapitalism, which goes largely unchecked and unregulated. It allows people like Bill Gates to fund pet projects with little oversight or transparency. And then there's the issue of what agenda a foundation might be pursuing. And in Gates's case, his huge influence on groups like the WHO or other health groups. The influence is too strong. And now that we know that Gates does not have the pristine moral image that he has been painting all these years, especially with Jeffrey Epstein, a more critical look at his foundation, I think, is necessary. Is it possible that Gates's heart is in the right place? I suppose so. But when you are buddies with a pedophile sex trafficker for 10 years, you do have to wonder about that person's character and scruples. I think that the interview with Judy Woodruff told us a lot about Bill Gates. He was not willing to confront his sullied relationship with Epstein, just remarking that, oh, he's dead, and almost with a sigh of relief probably, because now Epstein can't talk. You've probably seen some of the memes about this, such as Epstein didn't kill himself. It was the very witty senator from Louisiana, John Kennedy, who said this quip.
How can I put this? Christmas ornaments, drywall, and Jeffrey Epstein. Name 3 things that don't hang themselves. That's what the American people think. That's what the American people think. And they deserve some answers.
One person who is thrilled that Epstein is dead is Bill Gates. But he sure doesn't like being asked about him. But you know what? We deserve answers. Just because he throws money at World Health, which still has many unanswered questions, by the way, doesn't mean we can just look at this spectacled, nerdy man with uncritical eyes. If nothing else, we should be inquisitive, and we should see more transparency. Whether you are pro or anti-vax doesn't take away from the fact that Gates has been talking about microbe-related pandemics since 2015. And because of that, I personally want to know where all this money has gone and how it has helped. Money is not just a source of power, it's a source of manipulation. More journalists need to be pressing Gates rather than kissing his tail and writing gushing articles about him or fact-check articles that aim to dispel misinformation about him. And people will see those articles and just think, oh, okay, he's not a bad guy. He's just being attacked by nutty right-wingers. It's not the case. That's the illusion. And it will become a delusion if we aren't careful about holding him and other major philanthropic superorganizations accountable. Gates and the Clintons both have a direct connection to Epstein, but they also have 2 of the most influential foundations in the world. Don't you think we should be paying attention? I'm Beau, and that's the show.